Hey friends, welcome to a special bonus episode of the 1 Minute Scripture Study podcast. My name is Kristen Smith and I am here with my co-host Cali Black. Welcome, Cali.
Hello, I'm excited to be here. I love talking with you about gospel topics.
We both get to get our scripture nerd on. It's super fun.
Yep,
And today we are actually talking about, and Kelly was just mentioning to me that she talked to her people on Instagram about questions that they have had that have come up as they've listened to or read the book Saints. And she got tons of feedback on it. And one of the things that she got feedback on was questions about the translation process of the Book of Mormon, and specifically Seer stones. And so we today are actually going to be talking about the translation of the Book of Mormon, about how it happened, what the mechanics of the translation were, and evidence we feel that show that it truly is an inspired book of God, not something that Joseph Smith or one of his friends made up. So before we get into all of that, I just want to do a quick overview for everyone if you are new to this topic. So Joseph Smith, members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints believe that Joseph Smith received a set of gold plates, and on those plates was written the record of an ancient people who lived in the Americas. And for people who are members of the church, you know that Joseph got these plates, and I think we sometimes picture him getting the plates and then going home and opening them and being like, oh, guess what it says, guys? But it didn't happen that way. It didn't happen that way. He got them in September of 1827. And there was so much excitement in the area he was in because he had not hidden what he heard from the angel. People knew that he was expected to get these gold plates, this gold Bible is what people called it. And so there were people who were hounding him, trying to get to see the plates, trying to steal the plates. And he had to hide them. He eventually had to move with the plates in a barrel of beans and moved over to Harmony, and still people in Harmony, Pennsylvania are trying to get them. And so I think we picture Joseph doing immediately, just starting and translating the plates, but it wasn't until around 1828, spring of 1828, that translation really started. And that was with Martin Harris. And we know what happened. What happened to those? Callie, you tell us what happened. So they translated from April to June, and they got 116 pages, and
Martin thought, I should show my wife these. And unfortunately, he kind of was a little headstrong. Joseph wasn't quite listening to the will of the Lord either. He was a little too persistent in pushing his own will. And so we lost those pages that had been translated, even though Joseph still had the original plates with those records. He didn't lose the plates. He just lost all that hard work that they had put into translating all these records.
Yes. Oh, and that's heartbreaking. So they lost the opportunity for the world to have the Book of Lehi. That was the lost portion. And then it wasn't really until September of 19, they were not alive then, September of 1828, that he got the interpreters back. And then it's in the spring. So this is in April. So he got the plates in 1827. It's not until April of 1829 that Oliver Cowdery comes into the picture, and they just busted out. They worked so hard for 3 months, and they translate. That's almost all of the Book of Mormon that we have was done in those 3 months. So this is the history behind it. We've got this record that's been translated in about 3 months. We've had Martin Harris helping. We've had Emma helping every once in a while. And then we have Oliver Cowdery helping. So this is the story behind what we're going to be talking about. Now, I want to ask you, Callie, we've been talking about how Joseph translated the plates, but what did you learn as a kid about how Joseph translated the plates?
I mean, I feel like most people probably learned the same thing as me, that Joseph got this Urim and Thummim along with the plates, and he used that to translate the plates. And so, of course, when I think translate, I think of, well, if I'm going to translate something into Chinese, I would have the book open that I'm translating, and then I would have my Chinese reference book or whatever, and I would be looking at both and trying to interpret word by word. So I think in my mind, I pictured he had this Urim and Thummim that were somehow translating what he saw on the gold plates. I don't know if anyone told me that specifically, but that's what I've always pictured, is we've got the Urim and Thummim, we've got gold plates, and that's it.
Yeah. And I think for me, I found this picture today. I went and looked for it. If anyone's watching the video, I'm showing the picture that Del Parsons made of, it looks like it's supposed to be Joseph Smith and Oliver Cowdery. And it's just Joseph with his finger poised on the gold plates and Oliver sitting across from him. There's no Urim and Thummim in there. There's nothing in there. It's just Joseph pointing to the plates. And I think that's how I pictured it. I'm like, oh, well, he just kind of like felt along and looked along, and he's like, and all of a sudden it turned into English in front of his eyes as he looked at the plates. And I think that's kind of what I pictured, because that's like the picture that we have of that. Like that's the picture that I think is in most of our minds. Would you agree?
Yeah, for sure. I feel like I've seen one where there was like a divider between them, because that one is like Oliver straight up looking at Joseph with the plates, which we know he did not see them until he was a witness, but having that divider even. But yeah, still, it's just Joseph looking at the plates, Urim and Thummim somehow involved, and he translates them.
Good. Okay. So, and I think it's very interesting. Like we're talking about these topics and they're not secret, but they're not well known. And I think that is what makes them a little bit jarring for people, where you're like, Seer stone, what? Like no one mentioned that in Sunday school growing up. So I want to talk about that. Like, when did you even first hear about the use of a seer stone, and why do you think we don't talk about it in Sunday school?
Yeah, honestly, I think it was when I first read Saints, maybe, that I first heard about a seer stone. I don't remember if it was earlier than that, but I'm pretty sure it was with Saints. And in my mind, like, I had never heard of it before. I had never heard of Joseph using something other than the Urim and Thummim to translate these gold plates. And so I think it's pretty common in the church. And I actually was looking, when Joseph Smith wrote his history, he said, I translated it through the Urim and Thummim and the power of God. And so that's all that he gave us. He didn't actually tell us even more details than that. We don't even know. He didn't tell us how he used the Urim and Thummim. And so I think if we just read Joseph Smith history, we hear, oh, Urim and Thummim, power of God. That seems pretty straightforward. So I think it just hasn't been well known until more recently. We've heard like, oh, there were these other people who saw him translating, and they saw him using a seer stone, and they saw him with a hat, and they saw him with the breastplate attached to the Urim and Thummim. We don't even think about that usually. And they saw all these different things that we just have never even heard of. So like you said, it's not, I don't think that it was kept secret. It's just that we didn't have access to all of these resources of people saying, oh yeah, there were other ways that Joseph got this translation.
I totally agree with that. I think that with the introduction of technology, that's one of the great blessings of it, is that what like Neil A. Maxwell probably knew since he was 5, because he was reading all the books when he was 5, is now available to the rest of us. Like we're all learning this stuff. And I think the first time I heard about it was when I read, and I've got it here, Joseph Smith, Rough Stone Rolling, which is such an interesting in-depth look at his life. And I remember reading it, and it felt weird. I was like, what? Like, what? And I want to address that. Like, I want to address that, because I think some people feel bad if you're like, that doesn't make sense. Like maybe I do have a testimony of Joseph Smith, but then I find out he used a seer stone and he put his face in a hat and we'll talk about that in a second. But how do you think people can reconcile that feeling of, this is not the gospel I thought, like this isn't what I was taught growing up, and it sounds strange to me. Like, how do people reconcile that feeling with, I do have a testimony of Joseph, but how would you reconcile that?
Yeah, that was 100% my reaction. When I first learned about it, I just had this like feeling all of a sudden of, what did I just read? Like, was this the anti stuff that I wasn't supposed to know about that's going to take my testimony away? Just like these panicked thoughts of like, was I not supposed to know about this? This seems so weird, so weird. And I think you kind of hit it on the head in that sometimes we feel guilty for feeling bad about it, but we also want to go to this false positivity. We want to be like, oh, yeah, that was weird, but it's fine. Everything's fine. This is great. And we just kind of like push it down and ignore those weird feelings that came up. And if we just ignore the weird feelings that came up, they're always going to be there, as we're like, no, it's fine. If you say anything about a seer stone, you're anti and don't talk about it. Just like we put up these weird walls. And so I think for me, the biggest thing was I had to just sit with that emotion. I just had to be a little weirded out by it, and like not have that mean that my testimony was falling apart, but just be really weirded out about it. And then I took it to the Lord in prayer and I said, what do I do next? Because I didn't know, like, should I do more research into this, or is more research going to make me spiral down into some weird stuff? Or should I just ignore it? Or is there something in the middle? And so I felt I kind of was led on this personal journey of like, let's just wait a bit. Okay, why don't you do some research at these good locations to find information? And all of a sudden the pieces kind of came together for me. And I think that's what we'll talk about more, is like, it eventually made sense to me, but I had to let it not make sense for a long time and just be okay with that and go on my own little journey of, okay, tell me what to do with this information, because this is weird.
Okay, Callie, I think that what you just said like should be doctrine. If it's not, it is now. I just made it so, because that is such a powerful idea, though, that it's okay to be uncomfortable and have this niggle of doubt in your head and be like, oh, like you can still be a great disciple of Jesus Christ and have so many questions. That's okay. It's what you do with them, right? And so my thing that I have done with it, like the seer stone thing, him using it in the translation process, I'm fine with that now. But the whole idea of him having a seer stone and stuff, like when it felt super weird, I went back to, and I think we talked about this in our last bonus episode together, to the trunk of my testimony. Like, instead of focusing on this twig out here, and if you think of the gospel and your testimony as a tree, a seer stone is not the base of your testimony. That's not the most important part, right? So I went back to the trunk and I was like, do I know that the Book of Mormon is true? Do I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet? And if I know those things, then that seer stone thing might still be sitting there waiting to be figured out, but it doesn't shake me. Because if the Book of Mormon is true, then whatever means of translation were used to get it out, that came from God. Like, if this book is from God, then so is the seer stone. So I think that what you said is so powerful. And I think also it's important to focus on what the question really is. And the question here isn't about a seer stone. It's about Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. And just to go back to that. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of what gave me comfort throughout my whole process of figuring it out, was like, well, it makes you think that everything's going wrong, but then you can go back to, wait, no, I do know that the Book of Mormon's true because of, here's my 50 evidences in my life of when it's changed my life. And so I thought, okay, I can wait and I can figure this out when I'm ready, and the Spirit knows that I'm ready.
Perfect. Yes, I love that. And I want to go back a little bit and talk about how was that seer stone used. So I showed the picture from Del Parsons of Joseph Smith holding his finger and just looking at the scriptures. And we actually know that some of the translation, when he got really good and was super close to the Spirit, could be done that way with nothing. But we also know, if Del Parsons, this should have been like a trilogy, like a 3-part picture. The other part would have been Joseph using the Urim and Thummim. Now, the explanation of it is that there was a breastplate and there were 2 stones almost like in glasses. Is that how you understand it, Callie?
Yes, yeah. They always say like connected with a bow, but then anyone who explains it says it was like spectacles that were attached to this brass plate that he had to wear.
Right. Okay. So so first picture is just Joseph looking at the plate. Second picture would be him with the Urim and Thummim, and he's looking through that, not even looking at the plates necessarily, as far as I understand it. He's just seeing the words. And then the third way, and this is the one that people are least comfortable with, I think, is him with the seer stone, and it's in a hat, and Joseph is looking at the seer stone while it's in the hat. Now, do you want to talk about that? Because that picture from Del Parsons would be weird. Like that.
Yeah.
That would be one you wouldn't want to put up in your house. So why does he have his face in a hat, and why use the seer stone if God's given him the Urim and Thummim?
Yeah. And I have to say, David Butler has done some beautiful artwork that has Joseph looking into a hat with the seer stone. That he's done a few things where he's kind of turned church history on its head of like, hey, we can make this normalized too. Like if this is what happened, let's do paintings of it. So definitely check that out. But yeah, so this seer stone is something that he had found previously. And if you think about it, throughout time, God has used stones or rods or whatever it is in order to get his messages to people. You know, we have the Liahona, we have the brother of Jared with the 16 stones. We have lots of examples of these. And so Joseph had found the seer stone, and he was able to see things. He was able to be a seer with it, see things that were unknown to other people in this stone. And so it showed in light. And so the point of putting it in a hat was literally just to shield out the incoming light, so that he could see it in darkness. If you think about your phone and it's right in the sun and someone sends you a text, you can't always see it, right? Like you have to shield it in order to see it. So that's what the hat was doing. The hat wasn't like magical in and of itself. Like it was just the stone in the hat so that it could be shielded. And then Joseph put his head in so he could see the words that were appearing on the seer stone. And he also, other sources mention that he used this often because it was easier than using the Urim and Thummim with this breastplate attached that apparently didn't fit him extremely well. And so he preferred at some point to use this seer stone, and that made the translation easier for him.
Okay, perfect summation there. So I think that is a beautiful explanation that, like, if you can picture putting on a breastplate and getting these glasses on and having to look through the glasses, and again, I don't know if he was looking at the record or just looking through the glasses, but it sounds a lot more cumbersome, where he could just pick up the stone and he could keep it in his pocket, pull it out and use it. That makes sense. Like, I think we can all get behind that. So here is another question for you. I think this goes back to that idea of, well, as long as we know the Book of Mormon is true, then we can be okay with whatever method was used to bring it forward. And I want to ask you, do you have any favorite evidences that the Book of Mormon was written by ancient prophets and not by Joseph Smith? So this is kind of like the factual stuff behind it, not the spirit behind
it. Yeah, I mean, there's lots of different things that point it out. First of all, for me, my biggest evidence is that I don't believe Joseph could have written it. And there's lots of evidence that points to his level of education, even his normal style of writing. Nothing was close to it. Anyone that's tried to disprove it throughout the years, like, oh, there's a river nearby that has the same name as, you know, Moroni or something, you know, different little things like that. As compelling as they might be to some people, none of them explain the totality of the Book of Mormon and all of the stories to it. So for me, honestly, the biggest evidence is that Joseph could not have done that.
I think it's just so logical. Like, and the fact that no one has been able to disprove it despite all of the efforts. Like, there's been so many efforts. Yeah, I agree with that. I would actually, for anyone who wants to strengthen their testimony and kind of feels like they could use a base of like factual evidence, I love John Hilton III, his book, the Little Book of Book of Mormon Evidences. And in that book, he talks about something, and I read the study that was done about it called word prints. This was done as a BYU studies thing back in 1980. But they have discovered that every person who writes has a distinct linguistic fingerprint, that everyone has a specific way of writing. And even if you try your hardest to match someone else's style of writing, the frequency with which you use the word and or it or whatever, like something will give it away. And so they tested like all of the different ways that authors are different or should be different. And they found that there were 42 distinct authors within the Book of Mormon. And they tested those authors against Joseph Smith and against Sidney Rigdon and against Martin Harris and all the other people that have been accused of writing the Book of Mormon. They did not match at all. Their styles, their linguistic fingerprints were all completely different. And so I love stuff like that, like you said, Joseph could not have written a book with 42 distinct linguistic fingerprints when he had like barely any education and 3 months to write. Like, try and do that, Joseph. That's not possible. So I think there is so much. This isn't our testimony, right? Like, your testimony is not based on this, mine is not based on this, but this is the kind of stuff that in moments of, oh crud, seer stones, you can go back and be like, wait, there is evidence to this in addition to my spiritual testimony. And so can we talk about that?
Yeah.
I want to know your opinion on that. What do you feel is the role of facts and evidence in gaining a testimony of Joseph Smith being a translator and not a creator?
So I'm really big into what the facts are. And this is something that I really appreciated that the Saints book did, is that it is just fact based. And you can love facts, you can hate facts, but they're still facts, right? Like, it's stuff that we know. And for me, a fact is a truth that is written down firsthand, that someone experienced. And so when we look at the facts, we know when Joseph got the gold plates, and we know when the Book of Mormon was published, and we know people who saw him using the Seer stone and people who saw him using the Urim and Thummim. Like, when we go through and we look at all of these things, it actually paints a very normal picture. And we look at seer stones in that time, in that area, people were using seer stones. Like, that was a common belief that people had, that you could access God through physical objects. And so when you look at like just the facts of like what happened when, who saw who doing what, and no story, no narrative around it, but just these facts, I believe that we can paint a beautiful story of inspiration and revelation that leads us to the Book of Mormon. Now, can you also take those facts and try and paint a different story? Absolutely. And that's what people do with it. And so I think that's something important to recognize, is you can take these facts, and the facts, I don't believe, are going to prove without a doubt definitively that the Book of Mormon is true and inspired. I think they overwhelmingly prove that, but like, we can't totally prove it, which means there's going to be wiggle room to tell different stories between those facts. So for me, the facts totally inform my testimony. But of course, at the end of the day, it's those feelings that I can't explain. It's those things that aren't facts. It's that emotion that I've felt when it has given me an answer in my time of need. It's, the comfort that I've felt as I've just opened it after a long day. It's the teachings of prophets that have come afterwards that have changed my life. Like, that is something that I can't prove, but I know that it is so true to me. So I feel like there's a balance. We can look at the facts and we can see that they can tell a story of conversion for us and a story of miracles. And other people might not see that, but for me, I mean, it makes perfect sense.
I think that's so beautifully said. That is perfect. And I would just add that one of the ways I've heard it explained is that the facts and the evidence are the scaffolding that can hold up your testimony as you're building it. That it's not the testimony itself, but it helps to have that up to support it as you are growing on your own. Because certainly I'm at the point where the Book of Mormon is true because of my experience with it, right? It's not because I've got linguistic fingerprints. That simply supports the testimony itself. So I think that's absolutely perfect. Thank you for that, Callie. And as we end, I think it would be really helpful to hear our testimonies of the work and what your feelings are about Joseph Smith as a translator of the Book of Mormon. So would you go ahead?
Sure. I mean, I know the Book of Mormon is true. It's changed my life time and time again, but more importantly, it teaches me about Jesus Christ. It's not a book that glorifies Joseph. It's not a book that earns him money or anything like that. Like, it is a book that just draws me closer to Christ, and there is no secret ulterior motive for me reading this book other than growing closer to Christ and becoming a better human being in my own life. And so for me, I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet because I know the Book of Mormon is true. and there's no one else who could have brought something so good and so perfect into fruition if they were not a good, not a perfect, but a good person who was trying their best to do what the Lord wanted them to do in a time period that I don't fully understand and with context that I don't fully understand. And that's something that I can't ever deny, no matter what other things come up to me. The Book of Mormon points me closer to Christ. And so if Joseph Smith brought me the Book of Mormon, that brings me closer to Christ, I know that he was a good man.
I think that's so powerful that it's the fruits, right? We're told that by their fruits you shall know them. And I think that is a question each of us can ask, is what has happened in my life because of the Book of Mormon? Is it better because of the Book of Mormon? Am I closer to Christ because of the Book of Mormon? And I've heard it said that the Book of Mormon is either the work of God or the work of the devil, right? Like it cannot be in between. It's one or the other. And you just have to figure out what that is. And I absolutely know. Jeffrey Holland said, I have not given my life to a fairy tale. And I bear my testimony. I certainly have not either. I would not be on this podcast talking about the Book of Mormon if it was not real. It's not a fairy tale. It's not made up. It's not something that I've bought into and I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. It is absolute fact. It's absolute truth. And I know it. I know it from years and years of study and years of experience with it. And I'm just so grateful we've been able to talk about this, Callie. If you guys have questions you would love for us to talk about, or further questions about the translation process or seer stones, we are going to include links to further resources about the translation process. These are all family-friendly links. You can watch these videos with your family, check out the links with your family, but message us on Instagram if you have questions or if you want to hear about something else. My Instagram is at Kristen Walker Smith, and Callie's is at Come Follow Me Study. Anything else you want to close with, Callie?
No, I think you kind of summed it up beautifully. And at the end of the day, I hope this is a good resource. And we talked about this last episode when we talked about the first vision, but we need to be talking about these things. If you're someone who didn't want to listen to this episode, or, made sure your kids weren't around while you were listening to it, I just invite you to think about all of the knowledge that's available and the blessings that can come to us when we confront the uncomfortable truth for a little bit, but then we use that as a stepping stone to strengthen our testimonies. And I think it's a beautiful example we can set for our kids on how to have resilient testimonies. So I hope that this is a good resource, because like we both said, we both dealt with kind of some, oh no, what's going on with this? We aren't like, yeah, this is great. Like, we're dealing with it. We're doing a whole podcast episode on it. We know that it's kind of strange. And so we want to talk about it, and we hope it's a good resource.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here, friends, and for coming closer to Christ with us a few minutes at a time.